another question here. Does the Fed have any other option to control inflation besides creating or leading us into a recession? I hasn't thought here, but do you have?
I mean, how do they reduce demand or increase supply, right? And that's, for goods. How do they reduce demand? You could argue, reducing interest rates reduces some demand for real estate and for some other, maybe credit card debt, but it's relatively, small compared to sending people checks, right? And so that will have some effect. The wealth effect, reducing assets prices will go to people. But again, who owns assets? Is it the bottom 50% or is it the top? And so, how do you take money away from, the 20th, the 30th, the 40th, the 50th percentile? It's hard with interest rates. It's hard if they don't own assets. How do you do that with monetary policy? So the only real answer, is to increase demand. Not demand, I mean increase supply. To do a supply side answer, and that's what monetary policy is good for. Ironically, increasing supply, they should be doing more monetary policy, not less. They should be giving the energy patch unlimited zero interest loans, right? Nuclear, like, here you go, free money, build a nuclear plant tomorrow. That's really the answer. Now, that's completely the antithesis of what the Fed is doing or what they would ever consider doing. And they would be seen as, completely lax in their duties by doing it. But ironically, you can argue that that's actually the answer. We need a supply side response. And if they're not willing to do it, government needs to do it. And I'm not sure that we're going to get that because people and populism is the name of the game.
Well, the challenge is that you've got a government that has demonstrated an inability to act, right? And so, I mean, you can lower interest rates generally and incentivize supply in certain industries, and while simultaneously penalizing demand in other industries by, for example, setting different rates on credit or setting different collateral thresholds on asset-backed loans, et cetera. But all of that requires, policy intervention, and in many cases, acts of Congress. And I mean, sadly, we're just not in a place politically where we're able to take the actions that are required to sort of with more agility and more strategically provide incentives and credit and money where we need supply to increase, while simultaneously managing supply and demand in other sectors that are clearly way out of equilibrium, right?
I agree that up until recently, right, there has been an inability for Congress and for government to act. We did pass $12 trillion in fiscal stimulus. I wouldn't say it's the right, it was too much and too quick and the wrong way.
Look what it took.
I agree, but what drove it was the pressure that had already built. And I think there's way more pressure in the system, which is going to force more. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to.
No, I think it'll be populist.
Things.
Yeah, it'll be.
They're going to do everything wrong until they eventually get it right. But that pressure will build and build and build till they do the right thing.
Yeah, well, words that are coming out of like subsidizing oil prices or having a plunge protection program where if it gets too high, they're going to sell. It's just so the things I'm hearing are just things I heard in South America over and over, in Brazil and Argentina over and over again that didn't work, just makes things worse. I just think from the perspective of what the Fed can do, it almost doesn't matter, right? Talking about the distribution of outcomes again. What people need to understand is that it was almost bimodal before. It was, is there liquidity? Is there going to be excess liquidity in the market? Or is there going to be a lack of liquidity? And you were either all in on risk assets or out. Now this other dimensionality of inflation and populism and everything that we've discussed creates a broader array of outcomes that we need to prepare for, that we haven't needed to prepare for 40 years, right? The Fed, yes, will need to thread that needle of they do want to inflate. They do want to be below the inflation rate so they can inflate away certain assets, right? They want to help those indebted people to not have as much debt. And so there is going to be they want to let it run hot. Okay, well, can't let it run too hot. We talked about the reflexivity of that. We talked about that people start anticipating inflation. That's a problem. So they need to manage that. But there's more room for error in that. As you do that, you're also going to possibly cause a recession. You don't want it to cause a depression, right? So it just means that there's more opportunities to make mistakes, and it requires investors to think differently about their portfolios. Just going back to like protecting oneself, right? How do you diversify your portfolio to deal with all of those outcomes? Well, now you have to deal with commodities. You have to deal with option contracts that can provide protection in case somebody really fucks up and there's a massive liquidity gap down, right? Yep. So long volatility strategies, commodities trading strategies, that needs to be part of the portfolio. The 60/40 ain't going to do it for you anymore.
Yeah.